You're listening to the Content Sells podcast, the show all about how to create content to attract, convert, and keep your ideal clients. Welcome to episode 268. I'm Suzi Dafnis, and here with me is my co-host, Michelle Falzon. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
Hey, Suzi, I am doing great, and I am really chomping at the bit to get into conversation with you today because we're diving into a really important topic, and that is how you can ride this wave of changes and shifts and trends that might be happening in your industry or your market or the world in a broader sense to get more visibility, more meaningful conversations and connections with your ideal clients, and ultimately more sales.
Woohoo. And as is often the case, the idea for this episode was inspired by some of the awesome initiatives and successes that are being had by women inside of our Marketing Success Mastermind. And we've been seeing this happen in real time with a number of our masterminders where they've noticed something big changing in their industry. And instead of waiting to see what would happen or going quiet, they've actually leaned into that change. They've gotten loud. They've been seen, incorporated things into their messaging, created lead magnets and reports and white papers and resources. And in doing that, they've created incredible momentum in their market and, like you said, more visibility, and they've gotten more sales. So we want to dive a little deeper into this for you today because it's very likely that there are shifts and trends happening in your world that you could use to your advantage to get more sales and to be seen as the go-to expert and a trusted resource of insight and ideas in the process.
Yeah, this episode is all about how to spot those moments of change and then use them as leverage. Because when the world around your ideal client shifts, and remember we talk about being client-centered, when the world around your ideal client shifts, whether that's a new law, a cultural shift, or a new technology, whatever it might be, your ideal clients' needs change along with it. Their questions change. What they're worried about changes. It may cause a massive shift in their priorities, for example. What wasn't important before may become crucially important now. And that means there's a window where your content, your offer, your advice, your message can cut through like never before and help them like never before. And when you do this well, you can literally jump right into the center of the conversation that's already happening in the mind of your ideal client. And that's where we want to be as marketers. And the best part is you're not having to use all your energy to push your message and your offer. You're tapping into this wave of rising need, wave of rising attention or interest that has already got some urgency and momentum behind it. And this is a huge benefit when you're marketing. It means more people see, hear, and care about what you're saying, and they're also likely more motivated to take more action and faster. And these are, of course, all the ingredients of a successful marketing campaign.
And to give you a sense of what we're covering, in this episode, we are going to look at the 3 types of change that can create this sales momentum in your marketing. And we've got some fabulous real life examples. So one is HerBusiness member, Donna Cross. She is responding to major reform in the aged care industry, and she's turning that into leads and sales. Plus our longtime masterminder, Amanda Farmer, who is using legislative changes and even hot buttons that are happening in the news to spark engagement and to create timely marketing angles in her business and in her messaging.
Yeah, and we're also going to share a framework for how you can take advantage of these shifts. That is, how do you spot them and how can you act fast, stay agile, and keep really abreast of what's happening in your industry so you're not missing that wave. Instead, you're in the ideal spot to catch it and ride it all the way into the shore.
Loving this analogy. So let's start by talking a little bit about why change creates opportunity in the first place. Now, there's a famous quote by Charles Darwin that says, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And while he was talking about the evolution of species, we've found that idea to be just as true in business, especially when it comes to your marketing and the problems that you solve. Because when something changes, whether it's a new law, a shift in values, a sudden tech disruption, what really changes is how people behave, their priorities, their pain points, their purchasing decisions. And for business owners, that creates what we're calling a moment of receptivity.
I love that. It's like the ground beneath your ideal client shifts and they're looking for someone who can help them make sense of what's happening. especially if it's been a big disruption to the way they live or the way they make money, or it's going to impact their health or their family, or those kinds of important sort of existential things that are happening in their lives. They're more open, as you said, Suzi, they're more receptive, this moment of receptivity that you were mentioning, to help and to information, to booking a call or registering for your webinar or buying your course. They're more curious, they're more ready. And when you can meet that moment of receptivity with a relevant message, that opportunity for connection and conversion is really, it can be huge.
Yeah, and I know I have opened up my wallet many a time when I've been receptive to a particular need, something that's happening that I need to act on. And we've seen this play out time and time again. And if we think back to when the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, was first introduced in Australia many years ago now, that single change reshaped an entire sector. And providers who help people with disabilities who were relying on government support, like getting their home fitted with handrails or acquiring a new wheelchair or getting home services, they had to suddenly adapt to a new funding model. And suddenly the people who were receiving those services had more choice, more control, and there was a huge knowledge gap around how to navigate this whole new system. Now, if you were a consultant or service provider who understood the NDIS and you could help others get registered, stay compliant, deliver their services within the new framework, you were in high demand. Because if you ran a cleaning service that depended on your government contracts for providing home services for people with disabilities, and if that represented 80% of your income, for example, you can bet that that business owner was now Googling, they was signing up for everything. Webinars, ebooks, attending events, paying for advice. And who do you think were the people who were in the best position as that disruption occurred and those decisions were being made? It was those who'd been in the market talking about the changes, providing value, getting seen as the go-to person, being known as reliable, useful providers of information, getting on calls, growing their email list, creating services.
Yeah, such a great example, because it shows how like an external force created an internal desire and an internal change in the way people were behaving. And the same thing is happening all the time on smaller or maybe more local scales. Maybe it's a policy change. Maybe it's a shift in community expectations, or maybe it's something shaking up your specific industry, a new trend, something that's gone on that's been a scandal and now everybody's super worried about, an issue. What matters is when there's been a big change, the questions your ideal clients are asking have changed. And if your marketing doesn't change along with that, you're missing out on that window of opportunity. And this can happen fast. So, another example of something none of us expected, COVID. We saw years of behaviour change happen in just a few months because it was such a rapid thing and it affected so many people in such a profound way. And McKinsey and Company actually published some data showing, this blew my mind when I read this, the equivalent of 5 years of digital adoption happened in less than 8 weeks in 2020.
Amazing.
So the sort of shifts that had previously taken 5 years before that happened in 8 weeks, the level of change. Everybody went online, right? And we all remember that as the world jumped on Zoom almost overnight. So industries like online learning, people who provided remote work tools, food delivery, health tech, e-commerce, they exploded. I remember watching the share price of Zoom, and Shopify and Teachable. They saw unprecedented growth, but so did small businesses who pivoted quickly. Yoga teachers who went online, restaurants who did gourmet meal kits. Businesses that spotted the change and moved fast didn't just stay afloat. A lot of them created entirely new and in many cases more profitable revenue streams.
And those of us who were already in online learning and had remote tools and remote workforces and e-commerce stores, we have seen so many of our friends, Michelle, who had some of their best years,
Totally.
after COVID, everything took off, And so these sorts of disruptions, they've happened all through history. So if we go even further back and we go to the global financial crisis way back in 2008 when the market collapsed, if we think back, companies like Uber, Airbnb, WhatsApp, they were founded during that time because someone spotted gaps in behavior, in trust, in price sensitivity. And they were able to see what their audience was becoming receptive to, going back to the term we mentioned earlier, as that ground changed beneath their feet, as the financial world was collapsing. All these other things were coming up. It's very exciting, actually.
Yeah, it just proves no matter what the market conditions are, no matter how disrupted things seem, there's always opportunity. And while we've talked about some big brand names there, Uber and Zoom and all of those brands, here's the thing, the businesses that thrive in these moments aren't always the biggest or the best funded. Yeah. They're the ones who are paying attention, who are listening, adapting and responding in real time. And this message is as crucial for small business owners, perhaps even more so.
And that's what we're seeing, right? Because we're seeing, and what was inspiration for this episode is we're seeing it very close to us with the women inside of our mastermind. So the lovely Donna Cross, who is a longtime masterminder, she runs a business called Culturally Directed Care Solutions, and her work focuses on helping aged care providers to deliver more person-centred, sustainable and culturally appropriate care, particularly for Indigenous and remote communities around Australia. And right now there are some massive changes happening in the aged care industry here in Australia, including a brand new Aged Care Act, strengthened quality standards, these are all good things, and a complete redesign of how aged care providers are assessed and funded. And rather than being reactive or overwhelmed or seeing what the big guys do, Donna jumped straight into action. And she's been creating lead magnets, she's been speaking at events, and she's been having very intentional conversations with providers who are trying to navigate these reforms. So she's positioned herself as a go-to expert, someone who can be a trusted guide through these changes, someone who's not only informed, but who was actually consulted with by the Aged Care Commission in shaping these new reforms. Huge authority.
Yeah, massive. And I love what Donna is doing here. She's turning this big legislative shift in her industry into sales. And this is the power of being agile. Donna didn't need to reinvent her business. She simply tuned into what was shifting and started answering the new questions her audience was asking, and creating the resources for them and, putting herself in the right place at the right time. And that's where momentum lives. That's where relevance is built. And that's when marketing starts to work with a lot less resistance. And sometimes we will feel that resistance ourselves. It's like, oh, that's a big can of worms, or, oh, I want to see how this all shakes out. But actually getting in and starting to really be seen in those changes early on is powerful. And, that's the momentum we're talking about. When something changes in your industry, it creates this wave, this ripple effect of energy and attention that you can either stand back and watch or you can get on and ride it.
And if we go with this idea of riding shifts and trends like a wave, and we continue this fabulous surfing metaphor, these kinds of shifts, whether it is new legislation or a cultural trend or a tech breakthrough, they're like a swell rolling in, and you can either be the one paddling into it early, catching that momentum, riding the wave to the shore, or you can be the person still waxing your board on the beach, watching others take a ride. And Donna spotted this wave early. And she's done really an exceptional job of building a funnel and a message and a marketing strategy around the fact that aged care providers are facing some really big changes to how they're assessed and regulated and funded. Essential parts of what they do are being impacted in a big way.
Yeah, so she's going out to the market with, resources and saying if you're not going to be compliant by the time this happens, there's a real problem. So there's this great inbuilt urgency that she's tapping into there. And that's what's so smart about what she's doing. She hasn't had to manufacture urgency or try to convince people that they should care. They do care. The urgency is already there. People in her industry are actively looking for guidance and support, and Donna has chef's kiss, positioned herself as that person that they want to reach by being proactive, by showing up at events, by creating helpful resources and building out that really relevant messaging you were talking about.
And that's kind of the key idea that we want to underline in this episode. When a big change happens, your ideal clients, they start asking different questions. They're Googling things they weren't Googling last week. They're losing sleep over things that they hadn't even considered a month ago. And if you can show up in that exact moment with the right message, your marketing doesn't feel like marketing. It feels like an answered prayer. It feels like help. And I love that term, answered prayer. by the way, Michelle. I know it came from a guest of ours a few episodes ago, but it's just like, it just sort of feels right? It feels like help. Yeah. So when your content taps into something people really care about, everything becomes easier. People are more open, the resistance goes down, your lead magnets get swallowed up, more downloads, your webinars get more registrations, your sales conversations get more traction because you are no longer trying to manufacture interest, as Michelle said. You're simply matching the momentum that is already there, that's been created for you.
Yeah, 100%. And we thought it might help as you start to look at your own industry, as we maybe have got your cogs turning. Have a look at your own industry and your market to explore some of the different types of change you might start paying attention to. So you can begin spotting these same opportunities like Donna did in your own industry as early as possible and then turn them into powerful reasons to reach out, to re-engage or to create new content or new offers. And while this isn't an exhaustive list, you might think of other things, and we totally encourage you to do that. A lot of the time as you're sort of scanning your market for what might be the big shift or the change that's coming, sometimes it's obvious, like Donna had that big legislative change, but other times they're more subtle. So these shifts and trends and big changes tend to happen in these 5 categories. So the first is legislative or regulatory changes in your industry, cultural and social shifts. That's number 2. Number 3, technological disruption. Something changes in a big way that completely shifts the game. 4, financial disruption. Something suddenly gets cheaper or the market tanks or whatever it might be. And 5, environmental or physical events, things we might not sort of expect, natural disasters or a pandemic or, something going on with the climate changes and so on. So we're going to explore some of these today with examples, and we encourage you to make a mental note of that list. Really just kind of scan your own market, scan your own world, and ask yourself, in my market right now, are there changes to the rules and the laws that are happening or about to happen, like the NDIS example that Suzi mentioned, or what Donna Cross is finding in her industry? Another of our mastermind is Christy Lee Billett, works in HR, human resources, and there's constant compliance and legal changes happening in that market, and she's really positioned herself very well and often rides those sort of trends and shifts to draw her ideal client to her and get them to buy from her. You also want to ask yourself, has there been a big shift in people's thinking or values or trends? If you teach social media marketing, there's been a huge shift away from talking heads to this more sort of cinematic narrative approach. The taste in the market is shifting. So that might be a cultural or a social shift that you can pay attention to and help people to navigate. Maybe there's tech changes, like what's AI doing to your market? Are there financial disruptions? Like maybe you're in a market that impacts tariff increases. I've got a friend who teaches people how to sell on Amazon. Well, he's had to address a lot of these shifts that are going on right now. Because when the economy shifts, positively or negatively, your clients' spending habits shift. Their client base's spending habits shift. And that creates a new opportunity to reposition what you offer to meet that moment that they're in. Or, just to quickly scan over that list again, are there some environmental issues or physical events disrupting your market right now? Let's say you support service-based businesses and there's been a big jump in insurance premiums, and maybe there's another big jump forecast that's going to rise in the next year in these high-risk zones that have all been rezoned due to climate change. That is something that you might want to get out in front of. You could create a future-proof your business kind of offer, helping clients put systems or language or documentation in place that positions them more favorably with insurers and helps them avoid being cut off or helps them find other ways to mitigate risk if they can't get an insurance policy. So all of these things kind of there for you to start thinking about where might these shifts or changes or, trends be occurring. You're getting ahead of the disruption. You're getting ahead of the change when you can do that and making your clients feel safer and smarter and more likely to pay attention to you in the process.
And as we go into some more detail here, definitely think about how it applies to your situation. And I want to dive into that first category that you mentioned, Michelle, and we've touched on this a little bit already in the case of Donna Cross and the aged care reforms. And I think there's a lot of scope for almost all business types to find something here to work with, and that is changes in laws and regulations. So That's the first category we're going to look at. Now, so many industries right now are undergoing major reform: aged care, mental health, climate and energy, building and strata law, education. And every time new legislation comes in, it creates a wave of confusion, urgency, a demand for more information and support, as well as a wave of new opportunities. Like Michelle said, anytime my mentor used to say, anytime the market crashes, someone is making a lot of money. Right?
Exactly.
And so you just have to find where that opportunity is. So new problems to be solved, new ways of doing things, new customers that are now going to be in your sphere. And while we've talked, as I said, about Donna in aged care, I want to jump to a totally different industry, and that's the property industry, specifically strata property. And this is the market that one of our longtime masterminders, Amanda Farmer from Your Strata Property, is a go-to person, is a leader in. Now, she's a strata lawyer who's done an incredible job of turning updates to laws and regulations into content that attracts and converts into her Your Strata Property membership and into her conferences, live events, consulting. So every time a new bylaw, case law precedent or reform is introduced, Amanda uses this as a chance to re-engage with her audience. She'll jump on and record podcast episodes. She'll share insights in her community. She'll update her resources. And the key is, and this is, I think, her winning formula, she does it fast. She's often one of the first to break it down to plain language, to break the news, if you like, to her audience and to get it out there. And that creates so much trust, because in that moment, her audience isn't just hearing about a legal update, they're getting the context, they're getting leadership, they're getting someone who maps it across to their situation. And that makes Amanda the go-to person, not just for advice, but also for services. She's also great at getting into the media because guess who also loves to ride the wave of disruption? The media. And they don't always have all the content. So radio stations, TV stations, newspapers, magazines, they have all come knocking on Amanda's door to get her comments, to have her on their shows. For example, to talk about this hot topic that she's being really vocal about and showing up as the go-to person for. And what legislation changes or regulations or other legal things are happening in your world that you can hop onto. Like, that might take a little bit of investigation, but something is typically happening in any industry at any time. What new laws and, as a result, policy updates can you comment on and be vocal about? How can you become the trusted guide helping your audience make sense of something that feels confusing or overwhelming? How can you launch the new product or program quickly that solves a need that's been created by this shift? Because that's something we can all do, whether we're in law, health, business, coaching, education. If there's something new happening that your ideal client needs to understand, you can step up and help them navigate it, or you can create a product or service that helps them solve that problem.
Yeah, so good. So good. I mean, my cogs are turning, and I'm sure as people are listening, they're going, oh, actually, yeah, I could do that, or this is a thing. And that leads perfectly into this next category as you're sort of scanning your market, looking for these changes and shifts and trends and disruptions. There's one other place that we want to talk about, and that is cultural and social shifts. Because it's not just these formal legislative changes that can shift behaviour. Sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes it's more cultural. And that might be coming from a shift in thinking in society or in a particular group of people within society. The mood of the market might be changing. What people value changes over time. And suddenly the message that used to land just doesn't anymore. I mean, Suzi, I just sometimes cringe at, ads that were on television even sort of 10 years ago. They just wouldn't fly right now because the mood of the culture has changed, So the product that was in demand might have gone out of style or out of favour. And these are those cultural or social shifts. And while they might feel more subtle, or they sometimes come on fast, sometimes they kind of creep up on us, they can have a huge impact on what your audience wants, who they trust, and what they're willing to spend money on, especially if you can be the person who spots and names these shifts, kind of like what Amanda was doing with those regulatory things, because she's getting onto them really early. So like the massive swing we're seeing in the online space, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, away from the talking head expert, on social media for a while there, it was just all talking heads with the captions, under their faces. And that's really shifting into a more narrative-driven, cinematic, emotionally resonant content, even for short 30-second reels. People want less lecturing and more story, more edutainment, more relatability. They want to feel something. And that means the way we position our authority on those platforms has to change. We've also seen this in broader social movements. For example, the global shift towards more inclusivity and representation. Brands that ignore those conversations are starting to feel out of touch. They'll get called out in markets. Whereas those who genuinely align with those values of their ideal clients and express them meaningfully, they're the ones that are standing out. And again, this is where the areas of opportunity are. These shifts create a great opportunity to ask, are my offers and my content keeping pace with the cultural conversation? Am I still speaking into what people worried about or fond of yesterday? Or am I showing that I understand what my audience values now? Like, let's say you're a branding strategist and you've noticed a wave of clients wanting more diverse, purpose-driven visuals and language. You might create a new service or a content series specifically around branding with belonging. You're not inventing a need, you're responding to this shift that's already underway. Or let's say you're a coach who helps people with productivity. You've been doing it for a long time, but you've noticed that more and more of your audience is burnt out. And what used to be sort of cherished, this idea of the hustle culture, is starting to tarnish. This idea is no longer being appreciated by your ideal client. You can start to reposition your offer and your messaging around sustainable momentum or gentle growth. You can go on a bit of a rant about the hustle culture because that's where you see the cultural conversation is moving towards more balance, more aligned value kind of ambition. And so you want to position yourself right there on that wave.
And this is why listening, really paying attention, is so important, because we can miss these things. And these types of shifts might not come with a press release or a policy change, but they're just as powerful. And often they catch people off guard because they're a little less formal. And they happen sometimes a little sneakily, or over longer periods of time. But if you are paying attention to the language your audience is using, the content that they're resonating with, the stories they're telling, you'll start to see these changes coming. And if you can name them, like that point you made, Michelle, about the hustle culture, you can scoop up a lot of people who go, yeah, that's what the issue is. And I want your help to do this a different way. I want to know what the new way is. So that's number 2. And the next type of change we want to talk about is number 3, technological disruption. And this one has been hitting fast and hard lately, from AI to automation to platform changes. And the ripple effects are huge. And what's interesting is that technology doesn't just change the tools we use, it changes our expectations. It changes how fast people want results, how they want to communicate, how much they're willing to pay for something that they can now do with a click. So there are tons of opportunities for you that those shifts have now created. And that is a big deal for you, because even if you don't consider yourself a tech-driven business, your audience is still being shaped by those tech shifts. Their behavior is changing, their standards are changing. And one example we've seen again and again is when a platform changes the rules, like a major algorithm update on Instagram or Facebook. Suddenly, engagement goes through the floor, drops way down, or visibility shifts, and the content that used to perform well, like you said, used to be talking heads, it stops landing. So if you're a social media manager or a content strategist, this is the prime time to show it with your leadership. You could create a lead magnet, a checklist, a training, something like what the algorithm update means for your next 30 Instagram posts. Now that content feels urgent, relevant, immediately valuable. I want to know now because I just saw the drop in my stats. Or if you think about the rise of AI, a lot of coaches and creatives and copywriters we work with, they felt unsure how to respond at first. Would AI replace them? Would it change what they offered? And then we started to see some really smart responses, like a business coaching program that integrated AI tools into their offer as a value add. Or a friend of mine who has a business coaching program who started leading with how to put AI in your business in his live events to then scoop people up who are like, I need to know this, into his year-long program. I also have a friend who runs a business that helps business owners find virtual team members, like marketing support or executive assistants or social media assistants. And at first, she thought that AI might mean an end to most of the jobs that her team were now being hired to do. But now she sees that having an AI-powered team of virtual assistants who are smart about how to use AI in small business, that can be a superpower for her. Because it's one thing to use AI like ChatGPT just to use it, and it's another thing to use it well. So imagine you're looking for a virtual assistant and you have the choice between a virtual assistant and a virtual assistant who is super trained on AI and can use that in your business. It makes it an easy choice. So there's a big opportunity here. When tech disrupts your market, don't retreat, step forward. Show that you can help your audience navigate that change. Even if you're not the tech expert, and I know I definitely am, but you can still be the guide.
Oh, for sure. And I really want to pick up on that point you said about don't retreat. You know, that example of the VAs, things can have us feel a bit insecure, like, oh, is my business about to go down the drain? But actually, if you can acknowledge the shift and be looking and listening for the shift so you can see it coming, and then go, okay, how do I become the guide in this? How do I support? How do I help my people? You might just be sitting on one of the best opportunities that's come along in a long time. So it's how you see these changes, and that's what this whole episode is about. So you want to focus on helping your audience understand what it means for them. Simply doing that is enough to help your message stand out and get feedback from them and start to pivot and change and create things that are more relevant and more helpful to them, and have more people pay more attention to you and what you sell. So we're making great progress, and I want to quickly touch on another one of these category changes, and this is one that affects everyone, and that's number 4, financial disruption. And this kind of covers all manner of things like interest rate rises, inflation, global economic instability, or even industry-specific funding cuts or regional or local financial changes. And there's probably, dozens of other financial disruptions that you're thinking of as you're listening right now that might be more relevant to you and your market. And they can have a huge impact on how and whether and where and when people are spending money. And, financial disruption doesn't always mean recession or collapse. Sometimes it's a shift in buying priorities. People might still be spending, but they're spending differently. We saw that happen during COVID. People spent actually a lot of money during COVID. They just spent it a little differently. Maybe in a certain market condition, they're looking for more value or more flexibility. Like, can I get out of this in 6 months if I need to, if it's an uncertain period? Or they're delaying certain kinds of purchases and fast-tracking others. Or you've got things like all new currencies coming into markets, like cryptocurrency, creating disruptions and opportunities. Like, I know a few course creators in the US are taking Bitcoin as payment for their programs.
Wow.
Yeah. And, if you happen to teach on wealth creation or you have any sort of business in that space, you probably needed to address crypto as it became a rising trend, and that trend sort of keeps shifting and changing. And you need to keep addressing it as big changes in that space continue to happen. And this is where...
I love that.
What's that?
Sorry, just being paid in crypto. We were once paid in gold.
Oh my gosh.
But do you know
Gold
what's happened to
bars?
that gold? Gold bars. Do you know what's happened to that? Like, that has appreciated so much over the last, this is 20 years ago. It was like the best seminar payment ever.
That is fantastic. So you just laid your gold bars in some sort of, safety deposit box somewhere, like in a James Bond movie? I love it. That is fantastic. So that person probably ended up paying like $1 million billion for their $2,000 program or something. My gosh, that's unreal.
That's right. I'll take gold over Bitcoin. That's because, I understand it more. It's just there.
Yeah, you can put that gold in your safety deposit box.
That's right.
That's amazing. I love that story. But this, I think the crypto thing is interesting only because things that were sacred cows, like you couldn't imagine a currency replacing money, like the old-fashioned idea of money. But of course, people used to trade dates before money became a thing, and gold, trading gold or bartering for things, so that everything you think is solid is not. And so there are going to be changes no matter what they are for your industry. And this is where your marketing needs to adapt. As with all these types of changes, if you're still talking to your audience as if nothing's changed or nothing's changing, your message is going to feel out of touch. But if you acknowledge the shift and you show people how your offer fits into these new priorities, that's where the magic can really happen. And this is where, if we're looking in this financial disruption space, this is where you might need to think about how people pay you. And I'm not talking about being paid in gold bullion, but do you need to introduce a different type of payment plan or a guarantee, or do you need to ramp up the risk reversal strategies that you're using? during financial disruption, especially if it's a time where the belts are tightening, people still want to move forward. They just might be way more sensitive to risk. So understanding that psychology is so important. So anything you can do in your offer and the way you're working to increase their sense of safety and value will help your offer land more powerfully. And Suzi, currency conversions play a bit into that as well.
Absolutely. Like a lot of us here in Australia, we buy American programs. We pay for our software. It's all in US dollars. And so when the Australian dollar tanks, we start to think differently. And so the American provider of a course or a coaching program who gives us different payment terms, they may not reduce the price because they can't control the currency either. But like you said, they might have a different sort of payment plan available now to take the risk away, to make it more of a no-brainer. They may spread the payments instead of over 3 payments, they'll make it over 9, so we can kind of mitigate our risk a little bit.
Yeah, that's such a great example. And it directly impacts buying behavior. So, these are the sorts of things as you're scanning your market, as you're scanning your industry. The property industry knows this well. When interest rates are high, they need to help with certain, innovative buying strategies or how to, refinance or, buy, with interesting purchasing strategies and so on. But when interest rates are low and the market is hotting up, your message and your programs and your services need to lead with strategies that are about how and where to acquire your next investment property. The key is to keep your ear out for these economic shifts that you might need to get in front of with your messaging and your offers.
Yeah, and like you said, they're happening all the time. We just need to keep our ear to the ground and notice that customer language. So that is category number 4. And the final category for you to be looking at to anticipate a shift or a trend that you can make the most of and really position yourself as the go-to solution is environmental or physical events, as Michelle mentioned earlier. Now, this could include things like extreme weather, just changes in weather patterns, infrastructure strain, climate-related shifts that directly affect how people live and operate in their businesses and their lives. And as we touched on earlier, these disruptions don't always come as big dramatic events. Sometimes it's some natural event. But sometimes it's a pattern or a prediction, and the opportunity comes from helping your audience prepare for what's likely to happen, what's likely to impact them down the line. So, for example, if your audience is made up of small business owners and there are forecasts of rising electricity prices or power supply instability, maybe it's going to be a hotter summer than before, or infrastructure in your region is already under pressure. That's an environmental shift that could impact how they operate. Now, if you're someone like a brilliant masterminder, Chantel Gilbert, who runs Blue Gum Electrical Solutions, and you sell solar installations as part of your suite of electrical related products and services, you want to be very aware of those shifts and the new data and really position yourself right on the cusp of those changes, which is exactly what Chantel did with her Real Secret to a $0 electricity bill. That was a webinar that she produced, and she launched that a few years ago. It was called Real Secret, the Real Secret to a $0 electricity bill. And now she's launched a similar campaign for the rise in electric vehicles and the need to have cost-effective ways to recharge the vehicle at home versus having to charge it at your local shopping centre or at a gas station. Now, Chantel not only uses her awareness of these environmental shifts to do better marketing, it's also guided the way that she's built her business, right down to the products and services she's decided to offer and the type of staff she needs. When we first met her, she was providing traditional electrical services, mostly focused on renovations and building projects, and also installing air conditioning, heating, cooling systems into family homes. But she was watching the shifts and the trends in her market, and she saw this growing environmental awareness coming. She also saw the regulation change and financial changes as the government gave rebates and as the economics of installing solar and buying electrical vehicles changed. As power prices went up and the cost to buy solar panels and EV cars went down, electric vehicle cars went down. And there came a point where it was very compelling to show how people could be better off with solar, better off charging their car at home, and in some cases getting a $0 electricity bill. And her business has gone through the roof as a result. Now, the point is, we're not talking about just responding to a crisis as an opportunity. You're helping your audience anticipate real-world constraints and new ways of doing things so that they can stay in control, they can stay empowered. And this builds so much trust and credibility with them.
Yeah, Chantel's such a great example, and the strength,
She is.
She just keeps making the right moves, and somebody from the outside might think, how is she doing that? But this is how she's doing that. She's watching these trends. She's paying attention to these big factors. And, we've sort of touched on this already, but I'm just going to keep mentioning it. When you do this, just like Chantel, your offer feels immediately relevant because you're speaking into the actual conditions that your client is facing. Like, they are really seriously considering buying an electric vehicle, or they are looking at their electricity bill and really thinking, is now the moment to leap into solar? This seems like it's becoming more like a thing I should investigate. And so you want to be really tapping into that. So a quick recap, the 5 types of change that can create momentum in your marketing, these categories you want to be scanning for identifying a shift or a trend or a big change that you can really use to your advantage. 1, legislative or regulatory changes. 2, cultural and social shifts. 3, technological disruption. 4, financial disruption. And 5, environmental or physical events. And, you might be thinking, okay, but how do I know which one, to pay attention to? Like, how do I do that? Like, I'm scanning the market, I'm sort of seeing what's going on. What do I pay attention to, and what do I do once I've spotted something? And this is where it gets really exciting, because once you start building this awareness, we can pretty much guarantee you're going to begin to see opportunities everywhere. You'll hear something on the radio, you'll read a headline, you'll get a question from a client, and you realize, oh, wow, that's a shift. Or I think I'm seeing the start of a trend, or this looks like a big change coming.
Absolutely. So we want to give you a simple 3-step approach to help you become more agile, more responsive to these changes. And we're calling it listen, translate, respond. So let's start with listen. This is about tuning in. We mentioned this earlier. What's changing in your industry, in your client's world, in the broader culture? Where are the signals showing up? So where might you look? You might look in places like headlines, policy announcements, social media trends, or community conversations, or feedback from your clients or customer service team. That's a great one. Or event themes, podcast topics, newsletter intros, right? The messaging will be out there. You can also set up Google alerts for keywords that relate to your industry, and you will get emails when news results show up for a topic that you've mentioned. So as soon as it's in the news, you're going to have it in your inbox. So you can get, for example, information about news, new products, mentions of your name, mentions of the industry, or whatever the problem is that you might have a hint about. This is how you get on top of the news as it comes to hand. Yeah, even your own sense of, what are people asking me more about lately? And for me, Michelle, one of the one is just as I have conversations with clients, what am I hearing again and again? And starting to notice those patterns, and then starting to pull on those threads, those little wisps of, this feels like it didn't happen once or twice. I'm hearing this again and again.
I love that. And this whole concept of listening, it's sort of listening to the market, putting your client at the center of your thoughts, being empathic. These are all really cool attributes of being a good marketer and a good business owner. And the other place you can listen to, which is a place I know you and I are listening, Suzi, is, your own networks, and you might be in a mastermind or an association. We see women in our mastermind getting ahead of trends because they're sort of picking up on what their peers are picking up on as well. And, it doesn't have to be big or dramatic. Sometimes the quietest signals, like you were saying, the wisps, are the most powerful. A repeated question, a subtle shift in language, a new hesitation that didn't used to be there, a slight shift in results, up or down. Start listening with curiosity. And so there are 3 parts to this sort of process that we're wanting you to take away. Listen is the first. The second is translate. This is where you ask yourself, okay, I've heard these things. Now, how do I translate that to something that's relevant to my ideal client, to my business? What does this change mean? What's my ideal client now worried about? What decisions are they making differently? What do they suddenly need help with or want to avoid? What opportunity just opened up for them that they might not see or might feel scared to step into? And how is this change affecting how they see your offer or even what you need to offer?
And that's where your empathy, a word that Michelle has used a couple of times, as a marketer really shines. You're not just noticing a change, you're interpreting through the lens of your audience. You're putting yourself right in their shoes and you're making it relevant and specific and human. And so that is part 2 of this framework we want to share with you. And now that you've identified the change, you've spotted it, you've translated it into a client perspective, now it's time for step 3, which is respond. Now, this is where your content and your offers come in. What messaging, services, programs do you need to create or tweak to respond to this shift and ride the wave of opportunity that these changes represent? So you might create or alter a lead magnet or resource. You might run a timely webinar or information session. You might update the language on your sales page. You might launch a short-term package or resource. You could record a podcast episode like we often do, or you could go live on social media and talk about these things. This is you responding to what you have spotted and then translated.
Yeah, I remember when COVID happened and we had several women in our
that's
mastermind, right? They were just so impacted by it. One of them in particular, her business more or less switched off overnight. She took women on international hiking adventures, Yvonne Shepherd. And so we really tweaked the way we showed up in that mastermind to help them navigate those big changes. And that short-term sort of shift in how we showed up and helped them get through that was, we were really happy to do it. And it made a huge difference to them. And, of course, that just creates great long-term trust and connection with your clients. And, it doesn't have to be a full campaign. I loved about what you showed there, Suzi. Like, you might just be updating your sales page language. Or, there's one timely email or one sharpened hook. You've just changed the way what you're saying on the front end of your marketing that can completely shift the results you're getting. The goal here, meet the moment. And when you do that, when your content is in sync, and your content can't be in sync until you're in sync, right, with what your ideal client is already thinking and feeling, that's when the sale feels natural. That's when people lean in.
So we have covered quite a lot today. I have really enjoyed this topic and we hope you have too. And we've looked at the 5 major types of change that can spark momentum in your marketing. And once again, I'll recap those. So number 1 is legislative and regulatory changes. I have trouble getting my tongue around those words. Legislative and regulatory changes.
There's quite a few syllables there.
There's quite a few. Cultural and social shifts. Technological disruption is number 3. Number 4 is financial disruption. And number 5 is environmental and physical events. And we shared real-world examples of how small business owners are using those shifts, whether it's a new law that's coming in, a cultural trend, a technology update, a financial shakeup, or an environmental disruption to create more urgency, more relevance, and ultimately more sales for you. So now it's over to you. So take a moment right now, simply pause and ask yourself, what's changing in my ideal client's world right now? Is there something happening in their industry, their lifestyle, their beliefs? Is their bottom line shifting? Is there, say you work with women and they're all about to go into menopause. That is a shift. That is a shift that if you know 100%. that is happening, right, then you want to be on top of that sort of change that's happening in their life. Like I work with business owners. I'm noticing a lot of the business owners I've been working with who've been in business 10, 15, 20 years, their questions are different than they were 10 years ago when they were more in the hustle. So how might what is happening in their lifestyle, in their industry, in their beliefs, in their bottom line, be affecting their priorities, their concerns, their buying decisions? What are they now more focused on or less focused on? What do they care about now that they didn't care about before, or vice versa? And then contemplate how you might respond to that change right now with a piece of content, a new offer, a timely message. Could you create a resource, run a session, update your copy, have a conversation? So many options.
Oh, I love that. And I love bringing it right back to right now as you're listening, your situation. And I love how you're showing, Suzi, that it doesn't have to be huge or complicated. Sometimes the most powerful marketing starts with simply noticing what your client is already experiencing. And I actually think all the time that's happening and showing up with clarity and leadership in that moment. And this is the approach that will help you find those big opportunities. They might start as little things. You create that one resource and it goes gangbusters and gets lots of downloads. Okay, that's a clue that I need to follow this thread a little more. So Start small, messaging, noticing, responding, and then see what gains momentum.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of strategy that we help women business owners with every day inside the Her Business Marketing Success Mastermind. So if you want support spotting these opportunities and turning them into real results, apply to join us. So often it's the right piece of encouragement or seeing how someone else is riding the wave of a trend or a big change that you need to unlock your own big opportunity for your business. And so we would love to chat with you about whether the mastermind is right for you. And you can apply right now at herbusinessmastermind.com. That's herbusinessmastermind.com. We have just opened up a few places in the program. So if this sounds like something that you feel will support you moving forward, please go ahead and apply. Now, before we wrap up today, I want to share with you how you can get access to the links and resources mentioned in today's episode. And I'm going to give those to you in just a minute. But first, we love to share these tips and strategies with business owners. So we would love it if you could leave us a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. We have over 100 5-star reviews. And so to give you an example of one of them, this is one of the more recent ones, Therese Ravel of Impact HR. They provide bespoke HR support for small and medium-sized businesses. She said, I'm super excited about my upcoming holiday to WA. Swimming with whale sharks is on my bucket list. She's given us 5 stars and said, however, I've been warned there will be many hours driving to get there, so I need to be prepared. When selecting which podcast to download in preparation, content cells kept coming up. So much goodness in every episode. My biggest issue was limiting the ones I downloaded. Therese, thank you so much for listening. And I'm sure whichever episode you've picked was the right one for you at the time. So anything that we've mentioned, so thank you, Therese. Be like Therese. Leave us a review. Anything we've mentioned here on the show can be found over on our show notes. And we're going to put those over at herbusiness.com/big changes. That's herbusiness.com/big changes. That's this episode, but what have we got coming up in the next episode, Michelle?
Suzi, we are going to talk about what happens sometimes, well, a lot of the time that we're noticing is when people quit too soon. And they might be just on the verge of getting results from their strategy, or they do need to put a little bit more effort in to see a result. And they chop and change. They switch horses mid-race, if you like. Yeah. And so if you've ever experienced that, you know, you've been working on a strategy, maybe you've decided I'm going to do webinars, or I'm going to create a new lead magnet, or I'm going to pursue a new angle, maybe exactly like we've been talking about today, you start down a new road. And at first you kind of think, oh, I'm not really getting the results I want. And then you kind of think, I need this to work and it's not really working. Maybe I should try something else. Maybe I've missed the boat. Maybe it's the wrong time. Maybe this isn't the right thing. And then you go and do something else. And now you're back to the beginning again. And if you feel like, oh, I can relate, I've chased a few bright shinies, I've jumped horses mid-race, then this next episode is for you, because it's called Stop Quitting Too Soon, How to Get Results from the Strategy You Already Have. And it's a much easier, faster, better, less stressful way to go.
That episode is coming up 2 weeks from the release of this episode. So if you don't already subscribe, hit subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. Michelle, anything you want to say before we go?
I feel really complete. I feel like we've covered all the things. The one thing that just sticks with me is this word listen. You know, just keep tuning in, and don't be afraid of the shifts. If you can embrace them, name them and lead them, that is where you will be in the perfect position to ride the wave.
Speaking of listening, we want to thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on the Content Skills Podcast. Bye for now.